I was just waiting for some people to make an appearance so that I could, mm, and in the meantime, I thought I'll just put this on so we could have an uninterrupted discussion of sorts, since there were so few of you. Um, all right. So, first, uh, let me just reintroduce you to what we had talked about. Oh, then there is this. Mm, where do I put that? Welton Schaungen. Mm, well, let me put it here. I have no idea. Please, I have a class, man. Okay. So let me begin with Geistesgeschichte, which is the history of ideas, including the cultural context. This was a free floating idea in Germany of the 19th century. And though Dilthey actually, Dilthey had lived a bit even into the 20th century, you will find that this is essentially a 19th century German uh, concept which came out of the German Enlightenment and also the ideas following the German Enlightenment. So, Geistesgeschichte is to be understood as a history of ideas, which includes the cultural context, which means that it doesn't just say that in so and so time this idea existed, it'll explain. There is an explanation of the cultural context in which that particular idea came into being. So, just let me give you a very quick example. We talk about Hobbes and we talk about the state of nature. The state of nature, which he characterized as a war of all against all. Okay, and when he characterized the state of nature as a war of all against all, he said that this is pre-social because individuals sprout out of the ground like mushrooms, and therefore the individual is solitary and his life is nasty, brutish, and short. Okay, and then he says people enter into a social contract. I'm not going to discuss the contract with you. Now, this has raised many questions, like I told you, among people like Leo Strauss, but particularly George Sabine. George Sabine accuses Hobbes of being whimsical, and he says that the whimsy that you find in Hobbes is that, first and foremost, he's saying that the state of nature is a state of war of all against all. The state of nature is not the state as we know it. It is the what we call the conditions of existence. So while you're in nature, you are living like a solitary creature, and your life is short because it's you're fighting with everyone else. So, but Hobbes says man is also rational, so he enters into a social contract. So Sabine finds this a little inconsistent, and therefore he terms it whimsical. He would say that if people are solitary and if they're fighting with each other, how do they suddenly turn rational and execute a social contract to come out of the state of nature? Or if they were always rational, then why were they living a life which was solitary? Why was it a, a state of war of all against all? So, this for him is a logical inconsistency in Hobbes. But the truth of the matter is that Hobbes is not talking about a chronological state of nature. What we mean by that is that it's not like human life began chronologically, which is as a time principle. So when you say chronological, then you'll have to date it. You'll have to say that at this particular time, human beings were like this. And nowhere in Hobbes do you find that kind of a thing. So it's not a chronological state of nature. It's not a state of nature which once existed in the history of the humankind. It didn't. Then what is it? It has to be understood as an experiment of logical abstraction. That is how you have to understand logical abstraction. So, what is the logical abstraction here? What Hobbes is doing is he's taking the England of his own time. He's taking the England of his own time and conducting a thought experiment. And what is the thought experiment? The thought experiment is removing authority. So I give this example, a very poor example. If you consider your teacher, let's go back to school because it's in school that teachers wielded some kind of authority over students. So if you looked at the uh, school atmosphere, the teacher is a figure of authority. And when this teacher is present in the classroom, if people are not being behaving in a disciplined fashion. If they are doing whatever they like, they are making noise, some are like throwing paper, whatever, imagine all kinds of things. Then the question you'll ask yourself is, if this teacher is here and these people are behaving like this, then if I remove the teacher out of the equation, how will these people basically behave? Then it'll become a free for all. It'll become a free for all because there's no authority present there. Now, what Hobbes is doing is exactly that. So, while on the face of it, it looks like he's talking to you about a state of nature where it is a war of all against all. And even in this example of the teacher that I have given you, it is a bidimensional thing. The bidimensional thing is, if the teacher is supposed to be a figure of authority, then there is something wrong with that teacher. There is something wrong with the way that teacher is exerting his or her authority. That is the reason why people are behaving as they please. That is the more primary point. I'll deal with this in detail when we do Hobbes. So that is the more primary point. So while on the face of it, it looks like he's saying, how will people behave without authority? He's only preparing that particular ground to say that the existing authority is not good. So why is he coming to that conclusion? And with reference to what is he coming to that conclusion? He's coming to that conclusion with reference to the England of his own time. And what does the England of his own time represent? The 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, different kinds of wars. Different kinds of wars, even a civil war. Okay, and there's a king, there's everybody there. And despite all that, you're having so many different forms of war. Actual wars. Okay, you can check your history textbooks or books. They'll tell you about the 100-Year War, the 30-Year War, the War of the Roses. All kinds of wars existed. So there's something wrong with the nature of the authority. So Hobbes is conducting this logical experiment wherein, sorry, he's using the state of nature as an excuse for constructing an alternative form of authority to the one that is prevalent in his own time. So it's not a chronological state, the state of nature. The state of nature is a logical state of nature, one which existed in his own time, one that existed in his own time. Okay, so when he's suggesting a social contract, the result of the social contract is a completely different kind of authority and a completely different kind of a citizen. In fact, just a glimpse. Hobbes is probably the only person in the history of philosophy to say that you first construct a sovereign and a state and then construct a society. in his logical experiment. Otherwise, everyone says it's the society that comes first, and then comes the state. But in Hobbes, it's the opposite. First, you create a sovereign and the state, and then you create society because of the authority vested in the sovereign. So, if you understand him like that, then there's nothing inconsistent, there's nothing whimsical about Hobbes's description of the state of nature or the necessity for it. So, that is the principle of Geistesgeschichte. That is that principle. Okay, I hope I've made myself clear here. Now, you will find Dilthey also using these other phrases, Geisteswissenschaften and Naturwissenschaften. The Schaften spelling on the top is wrong. It has got to be SCHAF. It's like I told you, Welltown Shung is what you can say. Actually, you have to say Welltown Shaung. That's how you have to pronounce, but I'm not going to do it that way. But Welltown Shaung can become Welltown Shaungen. Um, that is, I've never heard of this individual. Okay, so we are looking at uh, these particular things. Geisteswissenschaften and Naturwissenschaften. Before I go to Geisteswissenschaften, I will go to Naturwissenschaften. Naturwissenschaften, when translated into English, becomes science of nature, which is what the positivists called natural sciences. Okay, so here, Dilthey is directly addressing himself to the this thing of the positivists, the construct of the positivists, uh, by talking about Naturwissenschaften, science of nature. He says in that you can use Faktizitat. Okay, we discussed this yesterday. Faktizitat, which is as used by Johann Fichte, it was just facts. So the fact value dichotomy that you find in positivism is basically what Dilthey is actually addressing himself to by talking about Faktizitat. Okay, he says they are facts, but what are facts? What are facts? Can they exist independently? I'm not going to talk about Habermas now. We'll see if there's a necessity. We'll talk about him later. And again, a typographical error. After Habermas, again, there is Fakti-Zitat, and it should be Geltung, not Geltun. Sorry, my typing is terrible. Geltung, where he is separating facts and norms in a binary. Okay, now Dilthey says that natur or nature in its existence or the way in which it exists is mechanical. It is how a mechanism works. Okay? It is how a mechanism works in the sense that what he's saying is that look at the sun, look at the earth. You know that the sun is going to. Are you going to go to sleep wondering if there'll be a sunrise tomorrow? Or do you lead the day wondering if there'll be a sunset? Will you? You don't. Literally, and I use this phrase rather, deliberately, a mechanism works like clockwork. You can predict the time at which the sun will rise. You can predict the time at which the sun will set. You can predict the dates on which the day and night are of equal length. You can do all that. Why? Because nature or the universe works like a mechanism most of the time. It works like a mechanism. That is the point you have to understand. So he says, the principles that you use in order to understand, in order to understand nature cannot be used to understand human society. That is his fundamental argument. The principles of understanding nature cannot be something that can be applied to the understanding of human society. It is here that he also targets Schleiermacher. Schleiermacher was one of the early people to practice hermeneutics, and he created this hermeneutic which he called the allgemeine Hermeneutik. Okay, the allgemeine Hermeneutik. Uh, that is a German pronunciation of hermeneutic. So what is allgemeine? Allgemeine, when you translate into English, it becomes the general, that which is not pertaining to anything particular. So the hermeneutics of Schleiermacher that Dilthey talks about, he says they are just general hermeneutics. And it's not me who is saying it, it is Schleiermacher himself who called it Allgemeine Hermeneutik. So he would say that this is general hermeneutics and it doesn't have the potential to understand human beings. And that is the reason why he first talks about the Weltanschauungen, or if you like, just the Weltanschauung. Okay, which are worldviews. And when I say in simplest form, I told you yesterday, we did talk about Weltanschauungen yesterday, and I told you that this is not that complex ideological kind of explanation that you get technically about worldview or about ideology. Okay, because it's when people talking about ideology use worldview, then they basically use it in slightly derogatory fashion, and they would say it is a not a simple form, but it is a simplistic definition of what ideology is. For them, ideology is a sinister, uh, insidious concept. And if you call it just a worldview, then you are probably missing out on the insidiousness and the sinisterness of the whole the whole ideology concept. You're missing out on those things. But Weltanschauungen is not that. Weltanschauungen is not bringing in ideology into its ambit in any way. So it's a worldview, the vantage from which you choose to view the world. All right. And while talking about Weltanschauungen, you find Dilthey actually discussing uh, Kant, Immanuel Kant, that is, and then uh, Hegel and Spinoza. Benedictus Spinoza is how he preferred to write his name, but people say that his name is Baruch or Baruch. I don't know how that is pronounced. Baruch, Baruch or Baruch, the de, the Spinoza. So Hegel is Gottfried Wilhelm. What is the other? Yeah, Friedrich Hegel. Or is it Friedrich Gottfried? Whatever, I'll have to look that up. People only talk about Hegel as Hegel. Nobody uses his all those Gottfried, Friedrich, and Wilhelm. Anyway, now uh, while talking about Kant, Dilthey says that Kant is definitely somebody who stresses upon ideas, because when you go back to the binary about the Fakti Zitat, apart from the binary that has been constructed by Habermas much later, you'll find that Dilthey himself had constructed a binary, which is facts and spirit, right? So that is a binary that he constructed. Uh, and for him, the spirit has to be understood as a cultural context, just like I basically gave you the example of Hobbes, so I'm not going to go into that. It is a cultural uh, context or a cultural construct, if you like, rather than a social, rather than a social uh, construct in the binary of Fakti Zitat. It has these, it's a complicated concept actually. And I told you that in English it is facticity, and we simply take it as facts. No, that simply taking it as facts ends with Fichte. Dilthey, it is contrasting in Faktizitat, he is basically contrasting what are considered facts with ideas. And needless to say, he's prioritizing ideas. Okay, so that is the binary that you find in um, Dilthey. I should have typed that out, which I didn't do. Anyway, so when he's talking about ideas, he says Kant is somebody, and that too when he's talking about a worldview. In the context of Weltanschauungen, uh, he's talking about Kant as being a subjective idealist, or Kantian thought being subjective idealism. He's calling it subjective, not in the sense that we use subject. When we talk about a subject, what are we saying? Or subjective. Subjective is something which is, you know, full of biases and prejudices, and it's one person's opinion, which is probably not true. Now, when he's talking about Kant being a subjective idealist who's emphasizing the notion of the free will, okay, then there he says it is not like it's a bias, it is not a prejudice, but it is just a detachment of a person from nature. Now, when we talk about nature, again, please remember, nature as he talks about here is different from nature as a mechanical entity. What he's looking at is being in solidarity. The solidarity part is important with others in nature. So your being, by emphasizing on free will, you have created what he calls an abstract individual, an individual with no ties to anything. Because you said he's got free will. So if the will is so free, then that individual he's got no ties with anything. If he has ties with something, he won't be able to assert his free will. So let me give you an example from myself quickly. I had an opportunity to go abroad to do my PhD. And my father somehow couldn't live without me since I was his only offspring. And he requested me, he said, please don't go abroad. If you're gone for 5 years and all, it's going to be difficult. By then, he had already come into his late 50s and early 60s. So he said, please don't do that. He said, if you insist on going, that's a different issue. He said, I have my mother, his mother, who was older. And so he said, if you go away, then we'll all be a bunch of old people, and I will be a little insecure because of that. So I didn't think about it at all. I immediately dropped the project of going abroad going to England, actually, I had to decide between University of Essex, and I had to uh, decide if I wanted to go to the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. I almost got the Girton Fellowship. I was shortlisted. Girton Fellowship is given by the Cambridge University. I was shortlisted to the final list, and they said, please keep all your documents, your passport and everything ready. You're in the final shortlist. And Girton, by the way, gives only one fellowship per annum. So they said you're on the shortlist. So I ran and made a passport. I was also waiting to hear if I'll get it from Girton. And if I did get the Girton scholarship, then I could even have taken my wife with me. Okay. And that scared my father even more. He said, both of you are gone? Then I don't know. So he had that insecurity. So I did. Fortunately for me, Girton sent a regret saying that we found you worthy of the scholarship, but in a democratic decision, we have decided to award it to others, someone else. Now, a democratic decision is where they put it to vote. So, okay. But Ernesto Laclau, you can do an internet search. He's the one who pioneered studies on discourse. I had sent him a write-up and he was so impressed with it that he wrote back to me personally And he said, I want you to come here and I'll take care of all the things for you. So there was that opportunity which I gave up because I couldn't leave my father and my mother and my grandmother. So can people always exert their free will? Incidentally, I have no regrets about anything. I have no regrets about anything. Okay. Uh, because I understand that there is no such thing as free will. Your will is always subject to various conditions, conditions in which you live. Those are the ones that are acting on your will all the time. That is the point Dilthey is trying to make. Dilthey is saying that by making this whole free will thing central to your understanding of the individual, you're creating an abstract individual. It's like he has no ties, he has no obligations to anyone. Okay? You have no obligations to anyone. You have no responsibilities to fulfill. Nothing. You will just be one abstract individual. You're like an electron that's going round and round. But even that electron is in the orbital because of the fact that there is a nucleus. So the electron is also not a free thing, technically. It's just that it's not a central part of the nucleus. So he says this leads to detachment from nature. And Kant saw reality as a line. It's infinite. It keeps going on and on. And he posited an antinomy in terms of knowledge. What is an antinomy? An antinomy is simply, I'm giving you a very simple definition. There are different kinds of antinomies. We'll see in the second semester if we need to do that. Um, there are these antinomies wherein you will not find a solution to a contradiction. Now, Kant, when he presented reality as linear, moving like a line, our understanding of reality, he says, can never be complete. Okay? Our understanding of reality can never be complete because if you take this finger as a line, if I'm here, you already see this has happened. This has happened already. And by the time I have understood till here, something else has happened. Now, if I take a longer finger and if I say I'm here, then this line has moved till here. So for him, reality keeps moving faster than our thought. And we understand things and while we are understanding one thing, a couple of other things or many other things are happening. So he said human knowledge is always incomplete, and that's an antinomy, a contradiction without a solution. That is what you see in Kant. Hegel set out to solve the Kantian antinomy, and you find Hegel and to a certain extent Spinoza, their idealism has been described by Dilthey as objective idealism, or he's called Hegel and Spinoza objective idealists, where human beings are conscious of their harmony with nature. Again, I emphasize nature here is not just nature, but the understanding of the construction of an entire set of relationships among people, among different groups of people, within a family, between families. All these things are those which fall under the category of nature. So, if you go by what Hegel and Spinoza say, then an enlightened person is conscious of the harmony that is required also, conscious of the required harmony with nature and tries to be that. And Hegel saw reality as a circularity. That's really wrong. I'm sorry. I should have said reality as a circle or a circularity. I don't know what I've typed. Please forgive me for those horrible errors. Okay, either call it a circularity or call it a circle, but for heaven's sake, it's not circular. And given this wonderful whiteboard tools, I can't even do. If I try to erase that, then the whole thing will go. That is a problem. So I can't even correct it. So he says Spinoza and Hegel see that world as a circularity, which is an enmeshing of the individual in his natural and cultural context, being in harmony with it, not just anything, but being in harmony with it. So it's a to and fro. It's a to and fro movement that Hegel talks about, and that's why it's a circularity. Okay, Spinoza added his two bits when he said, when people define something, they are negating that as a possibility of something else. In order to give this understanding of totality, to overcome the antinomy, Spinoza suggests that definitions should be avoided as much as possible, because every decision is a negation or an individuation. Okay, if I say Akshay Puneet is very good, then I'm negating the possibility of his being anything else. If I say, or if one of you says, Satish Chandra is a round fat man, then you're negating the possibility of my being anything else. So, in that sense, it's a negation, an individuation. And when used in dialectical thinking, it is something that produces a circle, and I will talk about that in detail when we do Hegel and not now. But Hegel believes that reality is a circle or a circularity in which you have a to and fro movement of relations. This idea of Hegel's inspired Dilthey to talk of what he called the hermeneutic, or in his this thing, it'll have to be he would have said hermeneutic. But since I put it in English, I'm going to pronounce it as hermeneutic. It is the hermeneutic circle. What is this hermeneutic circle? The hermeneutic circle is where there is a recurring movement between the part and the whole. Okay, you are a part, the world is the whole. So, in understanding, in interpreting and understanding, hermeneutic is not just interpretation. Please remember that it also has understanding. It also has Weltanschauung, which is worldview, which is nothing but an understanding. So it's not just interpretation, it is also understanding. Right? So he says there is a recurring movement between the part, which is the subject, and the whole, which is your entire social, natural, universal context. And in order to understand the part, you have to understand the whole. And in order to understand the whole, you need to have an understanding of the part. So, different parts have of something should be understood by making a reference to the whole, and the whole should be understood by making references to the different parts. So it's a recurring movement, non-stop. It's happening all the time. And that is a hermeneutic circle as far as Dilthey is concerned. He came up with this idea. He came up with this idea of the hermeneutic circle. The inspiration for that came from Hegel. And in a way, Kant, though it's a rejection, but the idea that you can have a subjective idealist, a free floating individual with no connections to anything, that is an influence, obviously. And that's why he read Spinoza and Hegel a lot more seriously, try to understand what they were saying through their idealism. And remember, all this is different from Plato's idealism. It's all very different from that. So he's therefore saying that you have to have a hermeneutic circle, and it is this circle that defines your interpretation and understanding of the world. Your it defines, that's the Spinoza part, interpretation and understanding of the world. So if any of you is wondering what happened to that thing on the top, why didn't this man talk about that Geisteswissenschaften? Well, I'm going to talk about it now. It makes better sense to understand it after this, after you have established the hermeneutic circle. So what is the Geisteswissenschaften? People have translated it as science of mind. No, that is not an acceptable translation. Okay? It is not an acceptable translation. Science of mind. It's not a science of mind. Not science in any sense of the term. It is, some people say, spiritual knowledge. That is also not very correct. That is also not very correct. Then what is it? It is understanding uh, I'll continue, should be, I'll continue that sentence here. Ideas, since let me put it here. Ideas are also to be understood as spirit related Okay, spirit basically is the life in us, and you would say it's a spirited performance. Okay, I say it was a spirited performance or a spirited defense of something. So that is the spirit he's talking about. For him, the existence of the human being so Geist is spirit. And when you write it with a capital G, it also means the universal spirit, not just a particular spirit. The particular spirit is written with a small g in German. When you write Geist with a capital G, then you're basically saying it's a universal spirit. So he trashes positivism, he trashes empiricism, all of which he says are generations of the human mind which is not able to distinguish between the subject matter of nature and the subject matter of the human being's existence. Something that is not able to distinguish between the subject matter of nature and the subject matter of the human being's existence. The human being's existence for Dilthey is spiritual. It is primarily spiritual. Okay, so can you take more of this? Hmm? So, what are the ideas of Dilthey? Having trashed positivism, Dilthey also trashes the notion of objectivity in understanding. Okay? He says objectivity is completely stupid. There is no objectivity which does not involve the perceiving subject. So he's also not a great fan of Marx, who talked about understanding the human condition through objective material conditions, Dilthey was the one who called it an epistemological break. He said you are trying to understand the human being by removing the human being from the picture. By just removing the human being from the picture, you're trying to understand the human being. So that kind of objectivity, which does not involve any subject, is not something that is tolerated by Dilthey. Dilthey believes in mm, okay, he replaces the notion of objectivity with intersubjectivity. And intersubjectivity can be synchronic or it can be diachronic. When it is in the context of the social science, remember, he doesn't use the plural form, which is social sciences. But he doesn't also use social science, he uses human science. So he says when you are actually doing something in the nature of understanding the human science, it can be synchronic. You're trying to understand people from different cultures, people from different contexts, espousing different value systems. You can understand them synchronically, which I told you is more in the present, and therefore it is shallow and it is wide. Shallow and wide is synchronic. That is, if you're trying to understand something that is in the now or in the present or in the very, very recent past. So that is when it is synchronic. So while doing that, you can have intersubjectivity. So let me give you an example. The example I give you is an anthropologist whose name is now Peter Winch studied several African tribals, several tribals on South American continent. Peter Winch also has a gripe with positivism because positivism looks at rationality as progressive and ever increasing, and thereby contributing to a better understanding of the world. So the present is always better than the past. The future is always better than, will be better than the present. So our rationality is increasing. So this is what we also find in our, urban-rural divide. We somehow think the urban people are more rational, urban people are more sophisticated, they are better than the rural people. We have this view. Okay. So this view also exists. This view also exists in the, what should I say? Uh, it exists among academicians also, among general people also. So we tend to judge people who are not like us, especially if they seem primitive. Okay, because I'm going to quote Peter Winch, let me give you one example. These feminists, this is a real example, by the way, in Kerala, they were trying to understand how the Adivasi women were actually exploited by different men, both Adivasis and non-Adivasis, and they have these unwed mothers who have children who can point out as to who the father is. But the fathers have been denying that these people are our children. Okay, so our great feminists went into the forests of Kerala equipped with the knowledge of modern science, and then they met one of the chief activists of the Adivasi women themselves. They spoke to her and they said, listen, there is a scientific solution. Okay, there is a scientific solution now available to establish if the father of someone that you are claiming, or rather, if the father that you are claiming, the person that you are claiming to be the father of your child is actually the father or not. So this lady asked how, and they said we can do a DNA test. And when you do a DNA test, then you know for sure if the father is somebody who's lying or speaking the truth. They said, you will know for sure that this is the father. So you should go for a DNA test. What was the lady's answer? The tribal lady's answer? She said, please go away to these feminists. She said, don't bring this urban nonsense to us. You mean to say that when a tribal woman is saying that so and so is the father of my child, she's lying? For us tribals, for us Adivasis, honor is everything. And by saying we'll do some test to establish if that person that the lady is pointing to as the father of her child is the father or not, she said this is an insult to our honor because an Adivasi woman will never lie. Take your science and get lost. That's what she said. Tough lesson. Very, very tough lesson for the feminists. This lady said, we don't need you to be our spokespersons. We don't need you to come and solve our problems. You have done damage by coming into our lives enough. Now stay out of it. Let us live our life the way we want to live. I don't give anything, any kind of respect to what you're calling the scientific way of establishing the parenthood of someone. I'll take the woman's word because that is a woman of honor. So you see, their logic is different. Their rationality is different. She's not being irrational. There is a value system in which the woman is seen as being honorable. The woman is being seen as honorable. And she doesn't want that to be brought into question by saying, let's do this scientific test. So Peter Winch does something similar. Peter Winch was studying, I forget the name of the tribe. This is all disuse of knowledge that you once had. Peter Winch basically says that he was seeing a tribal who was running around a tree, a particular tree, not all trees. And when he asked as to why that man is running around the tree, so the translator said the medicine man, shamans as they were called, and now the Americans, of course, have to change the pronunciation and make it shaman. I prefer shaman uh, or medicine man, whatever. So this man has said that he has some problem. I think it's a headache or something. No, he had some other problem. I don't remember that. So he said the cure to that problem is running around that tree a certain number of times. And this is not new to us because we also do pradakshina or the peepal tree, which is considered to be a holy tree. Okay, or those trees that generate the, what are those beads called? Anyway, so we also have holy trees. And these people are, they say that if you do this running around a certain number of times, then you'll be cured. In another instance, Peter Winch saw that a man had a headache apparently in another tribal group. So, what did the medicine man there do? He made the man stand in the sun in such a way that his shadow was elongated. Okay. Then he took herbs and ground them, made a paste of them, added a little water, further pasted them, then took the whole thing in his hand and went to the shadow of the head and poured that thing which now had a semi-liquid, the thing by, you know, clenching his fist and applying pressure. He poured that liquid that came out onto the shadow of the head, first onto the shadow of the head, and then he came and applied it to the head of the person. The paste that was left, he put it on the forehead of the person. So the person who was there with him, with Winch, he knew these people's languages, but he kept saying, why are you studying these irrational practices? And what you find is that Peter Winch told him, you can't call these irrational practices. And that man said, why? Why can't we call them irrational practices? So he said, if I give you a placebo, you know what a placebo is? A placebo is actually a pill without any medicine in it. Because there are some conditions which don't have medicines. And in those occasions, especially for mental illnesses, placebos are given. Placebo. So when you give a placebo, you take it thinking that you're taking a medicine. And by taking the placebo, you think the process of cure has begun and the body cures itself. That's what Winch told him. You think this is a rational practice? What is so rational about it? And he said, why are you believing that there is only one form of rationality? Will that tribal person run around the tree if he believed that it was irrational? That he believed the medicine man and ran around that particular tree basically means he thinks it's a rational act. So that act of running around the tree is rational. Similarly with that, why do you have to put that liquid on a shadow? What will a shadow do? You might not understand it. You might not understand it, but the medicine man does. And the patient trusts the medicine man. So it's an act of rationality both on the part of the medicine man and the man who has been suggested a cure by running around the tree or by, pouring this liquid onto the head, shadow of the head, and then applying it on his head. So you have in contention to this positivist theory of a singular and ever improving rationality, you have an alternative perception. Rationality is culture specific. So there can be numerous forms of rationality, all of which are to be considered real. Now, I keep telling you that I don't believe in performing rituals. Okay? My whole family has that. We don't perform rituals. But please believe me when I tell you, if somebody is performing rituals, I don't say they're doing something stupid. I don't. It is their system of belief. For them, it's the perfectly rational thing to do. Just because I don't understand it, or maybe I don't want to understand it, I don't know, it doesn't mean that it is not rational. Why are they doing it? Whether it's a death ritual or any other ritual, why are they doing it? They are doing it because they believe in that, the sanctity of it. So for them, it's a rational act. So we have to talk about relative rationality. Relative is rationality is relative to cultures, relative to history. It is a stupid thing to say people in the past were less rational than us. That's what Dilthey tells you. Winch is a product of the school of hermeneutics because hermeneutics has been applied to psychology, to anthropology, to everything. And this contribution that we find here is a contribution of Dilthey. So objectivity is intersubjectivity. So he says when you want to understand someone, become that someone, just as Herder had said, you are a regenerated person embodying the past. That is what is being suggested by Dilthey. Dilthey is saying if you're trying to understand practices in your own time, like Peter Winch was doing, that is a synchronic way of doing things. But if you're looking at practices in the past, or if you're a literary critic and you're reading Hobbes, don't dismiss him like Sabine does by calling him an idiot. He doesn't call him an idiot. He says he's whimsical, okay, capricious, all these kind of words he uses. He's not. He's doing a perfectly rational thing, which I told you. I explained it to you. It's a logical experiment and it's rational. So Dilthey says you have to understand the other by putting yourself in the place of the other. Diachronic is when it is historical, backwards. Synchronic is if it is in the present. So don't look at it like you would. Look at a practice like the person who's doing it. Or if it's a literary work, try to understand why the person wrote that book the way he did. So this whole thing of ideas in context, text in context. Don't read a book. Dilthey will tell you don't read a book like a finished product. It doesn't contain everything that you need to know. It doesn't contain that. You have to study the historical period in which that was written in order to understand what that book really is saying. That is the context. Text in context or ideas in context means don't treat the ideas in themselves. Don't treat the text as a finished product. You can read a novel probably like that. I wouldn't read a novel also like that. I wouldn't read a novel also like that. I'll try to contextualize it. So, for him, inter-subjectivity is the understanding of a text or a practice in the way in which the writer of a text or the practitioner of something, whatever that may be, would like you to understand that work or practice. This intersubjectivity, where you become the other, where you put yourself in the place of the other. Often we say, put yourself in that person's position and think. So he calls this Verstehen. Okay. Verstehen, the closest translation in English is empathy or thinking like the person whom you are trying to understand. That's Verstehen. This is translated into English as understanding. There are three forms of understanding in German. The other is Verstand. Verstand is, if I ask you, did you understand my lecture today? That is Verstand. If I tell you that I can understand the pain you're suffering, listening to this lecture of mine, if I tell you that, I can understand the pain, I can understand how much of an inconvenience it is to you to sit and listen to this kind of thing. That is Verstehen. Trying to empathize with you. Verstand is a simple part. Vorstellung is the third form, the form used by Kant. I told you yesterday about Kant, didn't I? Hmm? And when I talked about Kant's Vorstellung, I told you that you have to understand Vorstellung as the understanding of a mental image that you have. No, understanding based. Sorry. That you have, or a prior perception of something that you already have, and not of the why have I forgotten that word? Not of the and not an actual, yeah, no, not actual, not a real perception. It's not a real perception about the object or a person or anything. Vorstellung is the understanding based in a mental image you have of something. We have a mental image of, you know, uh, people living in busties as being unclean and all. They might not be unclean, they might be quite clean, but that's a mental image we have. It's a perception, not rooted in any kind of reality. It relates back to that context of that abstract self, free will. Free will produces Vorstellung. Free will produces Vorstellung. So it's not Verstand, it's not Vorstellung, it's Verstehen. Verstehen is what Dilthey wants. And this, the attaining of Verstehen, is what Dilthey, sorry, calls the objective mind. Inter-subjectivity, Verstehen lead to the objective mind, where you understand other, the other as the person would like to be understood. Okay, so that is the objective mind, and that is the goal of the whole of Diltheyan hermeneutics. And this is also called some people will tell you this is not methodological hermeneutics. They'll tell you this is epistemological hermeneutics. That's rubbish. That's rubbish. Dilthey is giving you a methodology of Verstehen and the objective mind through the idea of intersubjectivity. So this is methodological hermeneutics and not epistemological hermeneutics. There are all kinds of hermeneutics these days. Okay, so this is the end of Dilthey's. Are you people still alive?
Yes, we are, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any shots to be fired?
Yes, sir. One question. So if every person's ideas or if every person's thinking is rational, then where is the question of being irrational, or where is the question of irrationality
There's no
and the
irrationality.
criticism?
Criticism should be internal to that rationality. If you claim that I'm using my rationality is this, and after having said that this is the rational system that I follow, and you find something that is inconsistent with that, then you say that this is irrational, but you don't criticize one system of rationality from the point of view of another system of rationality. It is internal. It has to be internal. It has to be internal. That is what criticism is. That is what literary criticism is also, by the way. Literary criticism doesn't mean that you're criticizing. It is also appreciative. It also appreciates what it is that which is there in a book. And you say, this is wonderful. But if you find a logical contradiction or a logical inconsistency, then that becomes a matter of criticism. But just because I don't believe in rituals, I can't tell people following rituals are all irrational. I can't. If they say I have to follow rituals in this way and they do something different or inconsistent with their avowed, uh, you know, practice of rituals, then I can be critical of it, not from my point of view. Or if I say I don't believe in rituals, but I do get a Brahmin to go and do puja in my name in a temple, then you can criticize me for that. So if you don't perform a ritual, it's okay. But a Brahmin can perform a ritual on your behalf. How is that okay if you don't believe in rituals? So that kind of thing. If I say I don't believe in rituals, I should not follow any rituals. And also not depute somebody to perform the rituals in my name. Have I made it clear?
Yes, sir. So criticisms are to be made keeping in mind the internal aspects, and it should be logical.
Yes,
Just not, we cannot compare one, say for example, an idea of one author of some time cannot be compared with our present times and say that it is irrational or something like that.
exactly. Plato cannot be an enemy of totalitarian. He cannot be a totalitarian thinker, which is what Karl Popper calls him.
Right,
Okay, totalitarianism is a 20th century phenomenon. So,
right.
where on the earth is totalitarianism in 500 BC? Okay, so that is what we mean by you can't call him a totalitarian thinker. You can't call him an enemy of open society. There is no open society then. There is no such thing as totalitarianism. How can he be an enemy of that? So Karl Popper's book can be criticized for that.
Can we call him fascist?
What?
Fascist.
Fascist. Fascism is also again a 20th century thing. No, you can't call him a fascist. See, you also can't call him a socialist. Please remember that the word socialist came up against individualist. Till there was no individualism, there was no such thing to describe a society. A society was a society. Only when individualism came did you have to create an opposite category called socialism. But otherwise, where was the question of, it's like saying there used to be good, there used to be only good. How can it be? Good is in relation to bad. So when bad makes an appearance, you talk about good. But if there is no good, I mean, If there is no bad, and if everything is good, then there is no word for it. There is no word for it. So you can't call any of those things. You can't. Because in those days, there was no private, public domains. There were no there was no totalitarianism or fascism or Nazism, nothing. Even socialism was not there. You can't call it socialism just because Aristotle says what is good for the society is good for the individual. That is the default setting of human society. That's a default setting. It's only when individualism comes that you have to talk about socialism. Otherwise, there's no word for it. Okay?
Okay, sir.
Right. So 2 people were left in the end. Good, good. Thank you. On Monday, we'll do libertarianism in the morning, and in the evening, we'll do Gadamer.
Okay, sir.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir. Okay.
Gadamer will not be so complicated because we have established what the hermeneutic is. So it'll be much more easier to go through Gadamer. Same thing with libertarianism. It's a silly philosophy in my life. It's not even a philosophy, if you ask me. So those are going to be easy. They're not like this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Enjoy your evening today.
Thanks. I will. I
Yes,
love
sir.
MotoGP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Bye.
Bye.